It's Lucy Litch, and this is Tiny House Conversations. It's the Australian-based podcast where I interview experienced tiny houses, tiny builders, and adventurers in the tiny world so you can discover how to create, build, and transition into tiny life. Before we get into the show, I'd love to know, is there a particular topic you'd like to learn more about, or a guest in the tiny house world that you'd love me to get on the podcast? Maybe you know of a tiny houser with an interesting story, or a tiny builder who builds amazing tiny homes and offers a professional, ethical, and reliable service. Or maybe you know of other experts or adventurers in the tiny house space who have a message that needs to be heard. Whatever the case, I'd love to hear from you, and you can head over to tinyhouseconversations.com/request. If you enter your guest or topic request there, I'll do what I can to make it happen for you. Thanks so much. Now let's intro today's episode. Welcome back to Tiny House Conversations. Today I'm speaking with Jimmy Hirst, who is an experienced tiny houser from the Sunshine Coast of Queensland and who runs the organisation Polkadot, supporting sustainable and community-based living. Jimmy is a passionate self-professed social entrepreneur and social engineer, actively working in advocating for and helping transition the mainstream population to that of more sustainable and socially connective communities, also known as eco-villages, to help improve quality of life for all people, as well as helping reduce impact on the planet so that it may be enjoyed for generations to come. And in this conversation, we talk about Jimmy's story of tiny house living and some of his reasons for going tiny, intentional eco-communities, and Jimmy's thoughts on creating guiding principles and frameworks for living in community, how Jimmy found a parking space for his tiny home, the mutually beneficial relationship with your landowner, all about what Jimmy is creating with Polkadot, and lots more. Now, you'll definitely hear the passion and the advocacy around tiny house living in this conversation. So, on to the show with Jimmy. Hi, Jimmy. Welcome to Tiny House Conversations, and thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you very much, Lucy Litch.
My pleasure. So, Jimmy, you live in a tiny house on the Sunshine Coast in Queensland, and I'd love to hear more about your own tiny journey and then, later dive into what you do with Polkadot. So, are you able to take us back to where your tiny house story started and what were some of your main reasons for going tiny?
Well, I worked as a national touring DJ with media networks like Nova, Foxtel. I had CD compilations, and then GFC happened, and I went, right, I'm not interested in playing to nobody. No one was going out. So I was like, I want to try and reinvent a new career where I can actually be of more benefit to people and use those skills. And I thought, well, let's look for things that people really, society needs help with. And to me, it was obviously sustainability. It was also restoring a sense of community, I guess, in our living paradigm. So sustainable communities set me off a journey around the world. I chanced upon eco-villages in my travels like Findhorn, very, very well known throughout the world as being one of the seeds for the whole sort of modern day eco-village movement. Also the home of the Global Eco-Village Network, GEN. And look, they've got some good ideas, but there are also some limitations I found after I did a week-long eco-experience tour of their village. So that's the sort of learning that I took myself on a sort of self-funded journey of research to try and find more about intentional communities. So it's interesting that the tiny house story actually starts off as something a little bit wider, and it actually wasn't a tiny house. And then as I started learning more, studying and attending workshops with the International Communal Studies Association, looking into co-housing, discovering that, women elders are struggling with accommodation to be able to afford it because of the way that our economy and our society is structured, and aching to try and see if there were things that we could do to try and address those issues. Ultimately, it came down to this co-housing principle. And then how could we do it? Because all the houses are kind of built the way that they are. They're kind of fixed. So I then found and was aware of tiny housing. So after many years of researching, how can we help humanity, particularly Western society, become more sustainable in the way that they live? And also, how can we help restore connection between people? I then just kind of put in my head, it's tiny houses and eco villages. We ran several events on the Sunshine Coast who attracted well over several thousand people to them. One of them actually sold out. And we were just kind of failing forward, trying to discover things. I then discovered, we have eco villages around Australia in many places, or intentional communities. We have Crystal Waters Eco Village, the world's first permaculture eco village on the Sunshine Coast, tucked in the hinterland near Conondale or Maleny. And it was the world's first, so it's been going for decades. So slowly bridge those connections with people and just really sort of looked into it and kind of hit some dead ends with the eco village intentional community living. Was that when they're being so big in size and you're pretty much architecting new suburbs, it then gets difficult and awkward because us Westerners, since the Industrial Revolution, we've been kind of individualized and made to live more independently. And that's kind of been taking something away from our humanity, our connection with each other. It's, sort of ruined our extended family approach to living, which is, abundant in the Middle East, the Mediterranean, Africa, in parts of South America. Well, the majority of people around the world, the Kurds in Turkey, don't even have a word for depression because none of them feel it because they all live in community. So the tiny house, to me, I'm reputed to being the tiny house guy in the Sunshine Coast, but it's kind of like I don't look at tiny house videos on the internet and go, wow, how amazing is this piece of tiny house candy? Like, I really just love the fact that they're attractive to people, and I use them as a tool as to how we can help reimagine the way people live and how they can treat each other. And I love things that bring people together that are obviously going to be different and new, but also can help change people's minds. But they don't necessarily have to blatantly in your face, here's the rules and instructions. I like systems that are very easy, accessible, if not a little bit fun, because it connects with people's inner child. So that's how the tiny house sort of fascination or interest rather sort of began. And I'll probably say this about 5 or 6 years ago. I met my partner at the time through Noel Sparkles, who's part of the Australian Tiny Housing Association. She had Tiny Houses Brisbane meetups regularly around southeast Queensland. So we met up and she was drawing and drafting what she would like to build. I had the finances and also the acumen to say, let's do it. So slowly just worked on building a tiny house. I like projects and ideas where I can extend myself to not just be looking after me, because I kind of think, oh, who cares about me? I don't really care a lot. I'm fine. But actually, I'd like to do things that I know may be able to help other people. So we built and designed a tiny house for a women elder to be able to live in. So we're looking at women who are dealing with housing affordability issues, who are generally baby boomers over the age of 50, but not strictly, because it's affecting everybody at the moment. But several years ago, we were seeing that there was an emergency happening with that particular group of society. And so we went, well, let's design a tiny house that they could live in. So all the form and features of the first Polkadot tiny house that I'm living in now, and I'm very happy with it. It could be always better, but I could live in this for the rest of my life and I would be happy. And I would not want to move back into a rental house, not only for the cost, but for the dizzying size of them. Even a small rental house, I had the privilege of staying in for a few months after living in a tiny house for a couple of years. When you have a chance to land in one, and it was quite a bit of work, quite a journey to get there, the benefits are really tangible. It is better living. It ticks a lot more boxes. It's minimalizing. It's really changed the way that I look at things, and therefore I'm becoming a little bit more sustainable for the planet, because we're all raised to be consumers kind of in this society without questioning. I have definitely addressed that, and I'm against accruing more stuff. I don't like wasting stuff. So I might collect stuff that I can recycle, but I have to look at it all and go, do I really need to keep this, or can I move it on? Do I really need to have it in the first place? How can I reduce the amount of stuff that I have? And can I also borrow off other people? Can I store stuff I used to own with other people, because I can't store it under my tiny house? That's all the storage you kind of get for long-term stuff, apart from cupboards and stuff inside one. So you're going through this slow process of just casting off all this stuff that we're told is so good to have. And you get a hit of dopamine every time you spend money and buy things, and you've got nowhere to put it. So I think tiny housing, in very simple regards, is so much better for everybody, for the mainstream, which is where I'm directing this to, that I'm aching to try and share it more with people, I guess, help work with people who wish to do that, align with people who see and feel that. They're very fundamental things to our society. Sustainability is a big issue, environmentalism, your contentment in life. How do we actually, in a sustainable way, how do we actually illustrate and demonstrate this sort of living to the average person?
Wow, you've just touched on quite a few interesting things, which is so fun. I'd love to come back to some of those things, especially when you're talking about community and sustainability and conscious lifestyle choices, and things like multi-generational living. I definitely love to come back to that in a little bit. And before we started recording, you gave me a little bit of a tour of your own tiny house, and actually you've got more than one where you're set up. Are you able to let us know, maybe, I don't know, like a little virtual tour of what you've got set up there? And then you're fully off grid, aren't you?
Technically, we're off grid, but we do have an umbilical cord to solar because we have had a lot of rain lately, and that's reduced our solar. If we add some more panels to one of the tiny houses here, there's 3, we would have enough radiant ambient power coming through that we actually wouldn't need to have that. And when the power goes down, we still have power. That's a benefit. We have thunderstorms in summer, and those lines go down, and you can go for a couple of days without power. So it's good to always have it.
So you've got the tiny house that you live in, then you've got your partner's tiny house. Do you want to let us know like a little bit more about those, like the size? And you've got, I know you've got you talked about solar then, and then also like your water tanks and that kind of setup.
We've got an amazing top pad, which we're land sharing off a property owner who have been amazing. We're considerate to them. We're helping them upgrade their property, establishing permaculture gardens, upgrading the tracks, and just making it more livable property for more people to share. It provides a little bit of extra income for them as well. We have 3 tiny houses. We're living amongst subtropical rainforest in the Sunshine Coast hinterland. On this top pad, we have a commercially built tiny house from a builder on the Sunshine Coast, my tiny house, which is parked parallel and adjacent the other tiny house with a deck in the middle. So there's beautiful crossways access for both the tiny houses and a bit of breathing space. And a little bit of separation, I guess you could say, but it's not really needed. And then we have a 3rd tiny house, which is what we call the prototype. It's still being worked on. And then we've sort of been working on a new building system for tiny houses. So it's a small one. It's only half the size of a shipping container. It's 3 meters by 2.4, giving it great mobility, a lower footprint. It can be totally decked out to be a living module or capsule, I guess you could say. And the idea of the system is like Lego. It's replicatable, and you can get several. You can get 20 of them, put them on a hillside. They're all legal, built to code, and that can be a single dwelling. It could be a house with lots of bedrooms. So it's a different way of looking at housing, which surprises me that not too many people seem to be thinking about it. No one seems to be thinking about what we're doing. I guess that's why we're doing it. But we're currently looking for manufacturers to help us bring these to reality. So 2 of them have solar, the prototype has, and my house does. It provides a percentage of all our needs. We have 20 kilowatt hours of battery, which is quite decent because that's actually more than your standard Tesla batteries, or I think it's Sonnen who do batteries as well. They're from Germany, or LG. So it's a little bit over the top, but it's an experiment because I'm trying to test if this sort of living would suit the average person who doesn't want to really make concessions. And shouldn't have to downgrade at all their lives to be able to change the way they live, but adapt it to something more connective and more sustainable as well. We have the roofs of the 2 tiny houses both empty into a 23,000 litre tank, so we're all drinking rainwater. And we've only had to fill it once at the beginning. We've only been here for, I think, maybe 8 months, but we gave it a big fill of 20,000 litres when we got here, and that town water is slowly dissolved, as well as the chlorine and the fluoride that comes in it, that sometimes is not always necessary. So we're pretty much drinking natural rainwater. We also have innovation and technology that we've been researching and testing, things like air-to-water generators. It's a machine that will take water out of the air because there's plenty of it. There's swimming pools of water floating around your head every day. And if it's raining, there's a hell of a lot of water in the air. So It is no effort and no environmental impact to really draw it out of the air, especially if you're on solar, because it does use a little bit of energy. I've got a 30-litre air to water machine, or an atmospheric water generator, which I love. I religiously use it. I can't sleep without it now. It only lets out a gentle breeze of warm, drier air. It works like a dehumidifier with a fancy water filter. It's got a 7-step filtration process. It's got medical grade UV lights, which remove the bacteria and the viruses that can appear in water. It has lots of micron filters and reverse osmosis as well, which also helps remove pathogens. It has a remineralization pouch in it that puts essential minerals like zinc and iron back into the water. We also happen to sell the machines on behalf of the inventor and the distributor who's based here at Woodford, near the Woodford Folk Festival on the Sunshine Coast.
What's the brand, or what's the company?
The machines are WES, World Environment Solutions, and we have a page on our website under the Air to Water tab, which sells them.
I'll link to that in the show notes.
Cheers. But while obviously, if we sell them, I'm talking about them because I really like them and I really believe in them, and I think that they're a really good addition to off-grid living, particularly in a tiny house, which kind of merges into that off-grid living idea or concept. Is that you're drinking water without added chemicals to it, and you're being self-reliant, self-dependent, and it's healthy as well. So yeah, it dehumidifies the interior of the tiny house. I don't have any mold issues in here, in spite of the fact that where we're living, like a day to day, we're actually living in the clouds, the misty region of the Sunshine Coast hinterland, which we've got Sunshine Coast views. We've got views of a valley that stretches infinitely, where there's just really no civilization, just state forests, national parks. That altitude gives us a little bit of moisture in the air, so we have no problem with an abundant supply of water, especially in a slightly wetter than normal period. So yeah, there's all sorts of little bits and pieces we can talk about, but that's the general sweep of the tiny house configuration and the innovation that we're using to live here.
Yeah, amazing. And you mentioned before, so one of the homes was built by a tiny homes company in the Sunshine Coast. Is that Aussie Tiny Houses?
No. The builder was actually LJM, who are like an offshoot or a split of Aussie Tiny Houses.
Oh, I think I know who they are. Yeah, cool. I'll link to them in the show notes as well. Yeah, I think I've seen them around. Were they at the Tiny Homes Expo this year? And I feel like I've seen them around a little bit.
You may have seen them. They weren't at the Sydney one, but they were at the first Brisbane one, which was last September. They're good guys.
You also mentioned before, so the land that you're on. How did you find your current parking space?
Okay, that's an interesting little story. So my partner came to us in desperate need of a tiny house, and somehow she was researched and she found us and networked to us, and that all sprang something, and everything sprang from there. She was a single lady at the time, single mother with 2 kids, delightful kids. Her landlady in one of the towns up here was having to move back to her own house because of the changed conditions around the world with the economy and society, as we all know. So she was given, polite notice that she had to leave, and there was no other options that she could come up with. She was even struggling to get small studio apartments above shop fronts in local towns with exorbitant rent. And this is, a couple of years ago, because it's gone higher. The Sunshine Coast is now double. The cost of living's doubled or doubling according to the population shifts. She had no way of actually living with dignity up here unless she was sharing a room, which is hard to do with 2 kids, or living out of a car. She was really lucky that she had money bequeathed to her, which was just barely enough to be able to buy herself a tiny house. How did she find a place to put it? Well, thankfully, the state school that they all attend, it's a really beautiful school where the parents all know each other. It's a small one, so they all have a sense of community there. And she put the word out on the grapevine going, I'm thinking getting a tiny house made. I really need to find somewhere to put it. And she just made a home run. She found a perfect property, which the owners were intending to put pads onto it because it's some hilly terrain and enable other people to live or have guests and tourists and stuff. That's something that we're helping them with now. So she was really fortunate to actually move closer to the school where her children are going. then we've been pretty much given free rein on almost over an acre, for which we're not paying a great deal of money. We're paying less money than the interest would be on a property like this. And this is a multi-million-dollar property. Have no doubt about that. We're treating it with the respect that it deserves as well. We're also very environmentally minded, so we actually have to educate some of our neighbours and say, if you don't need to use Roundup, it's better if you don't. We're helping them upgrade their property. We're obviously making it better for us or easier for us to live on, or more tenable. And we're really considerate about the environment. The intention to fit in with the environment, to reduce your impact, to work with the environment, to live respectively in it and respectfully with other people in it, other animals and critters, but also other people in the area. These are all aspects of tiny housing which can get quite complex. It's a very simple thing, but the more that you have, you're conscious or you have an understanding of what good practices there are to tiny house living, it just helps reduce the stress and trauma that possibly can arise from it down the track, from neighbors not liking you being there, or if you're polluting the environment with your stuff. It's just good to be considerate. And I think over time, hopefully, the whole field will accrue more of a natural understanding and less of an entitlement for people to start considering each other and the environment. So the tiny housing, it kind of all comes with this new doors that can be opened to reconsider the way that we live and how we treat each other in the environment.
It sounds like when you find a parking space like the one that you have, you have this opportunity to form connections and community like you're talking about at the beginning, and then, be responsible with how you're living and making this really nice environment for each person to live in. And I'm wondering, do you have community that's also living in tiny houses on the land that you're currently on?
At the moment, it's just us and our host family. So it's two families, with the intention to grow that slowly and gradually.
Do you mind me asking as well what kind of rent you're paying, or what kind of exchange that you have? You said you were talking about working on the land and all of that too.
Mm-hmm. I can't mention the figures. What I can say is that my partner and I are paying a proportion of a modest fee for the amazing position that we have. Like, we actually have a better view than everybody else in this valley, apart from a winery, which is parked up on one of the ridges. As of, I think, last night, our hosts have become really busy. So my partner has been asked if she could help tidy their house for a couple of hours a week, to help reduce some of the pressure and the strain on them. So that's been offered as a rent discount. So it's beautiful how a lot of things here are happening naturally. While I've researched this stuff for 15 years, it's also really good to be hands off and just drop ideas sometimes at the right moment, when the serendipity is there, I guess. And to watch people kind of go, oh, yeah, that's a really good idea. And then they do that, and that becomes a new thing. And that's sort of like a form of managing and guiding something. It's a form of management. Like, I have a very complex and holistic understanding as to how these things will work after researching intentional communities for so long. We are actually working on an app that will help organize this for people, which will do a really good job, particularly if there's a tenuous relationship sometimes, or an immature or not matured relationship between a property owner and their tenants, is to be an unbiased third party that also plays a guiding hand in ensuring that the connections between the people on a given piece of land, which is considered a property, are at their best. And that is tricky stuff. But the ultimate thing here is that what we've envisaged as to how people could be living in the future, it's happening right under my nose. And just stepping back and letting it sort of evolve naturally by itself. But the idea is that we're not only concerned with and can address affordable housing incredibly well, except for the fact that tiny houses generally are built for the top end of the market, like Airbnbs, so they're incredibly expensive. We've got a prototype tiny house, which we're trying to pitch to manufacturers to say, hey, if you can make just as much profit, but you could mass produce them, would you be up for that? And you're definitely going to get a big foothold into the market, because there's such a need for affordable housing, affordable tiny housing in the market and around the world. So having that relationship between property owner, where the tenants come in with a gifting intention, is the best way to do this, is to go, I'm good, I'm getting a discounted rent, I own my house or I'm paying it off. But it's a lot easier to own a tiny house because they're generally at least a quarter the price of a normal house or a house and land. to be open to a barter relationship, so that pretty much you don't need to maybe just pay a lot of rent unless the property owner needs that money. A lot of property owners tend to be older people who've had income or earnings throughout their life, and they may not need the money as much as they might need help maintaining their property. They could use a hand, with property maintenance. They could use a hand with living if they're aging in place. They could be elderly. So there's such a beautiful synergy of relationships that can be created around this idea that a limited number of people have land. Land is going through the roof in terms of pricing in most regions, not all, but most. It goes up anyway because it's got to be indexed to inflation. So your $300,000 investment, if you add that 2% every year, it definitely goes up. The computer says to, $303,000 after a year. That $3,000 just fell out of the sky, but that's the living system that we have with our property sort of pyramid scheme that you operate property on. Not a sustainable one, leading to a lot of problems at the moment. It doesn't have to be just a money thing. And if you ask people like me, it's actually more importantly a social thing, which is never considered in the whole real estate market, the way that we look at rents. A community of people that can collaborate and work together and cooperate can save a lot of money, but also can be more stable and doesn't have to suffer so much tension that's unnecessarily caused by the whole living system we have. So again, it comes back to tiny housing is so cool because the tiny house generally is going to be on wheels and it can move. And it might take a few moves for someone to find that final place, a resting place where they want to be. And then maybe they're there for 10 years and then it no longer serves their needs. Rather than go for the complication of trying to buy and sell a house, which at the moment will probably be profitable as the economy keeps pyramiding up, it's a lot of work. So why not just have a house that you can just pick up and move whenever you like? Like I could take my tiny houses to the Woodford Folk Festival, which is, an hour away from here, I think. And I can actually use my tiny house to live in at the festival as if it was a caravan. And those are the sorts of tiny houses in terms of size. And then the limitations we're preferring to see with them is to not be these 7 or 8 meter or bigger, which require a truck to tow them, is that we should divide them into pieces that can be plugged into each other and even can be removed from their trailers, because the trailers are quite an investment because you're spending $7,000 to $12,000 or even $15,000 on just having a trailer. If you're not going to move the tiny house a lot, why not just have a trailer that can be connected and reconnected to the tiny house, and that can be used by other people, which is environmentally better, but also economically better as well. So again, it comes back to a tiny house system that we've been working on for a couple of years that provides all this versatility and innovative function. We can better design tiny houses if we actually consider the overall settings and the overall advantages and the social, economic, and environmental benefits that can be realized through them. Actually, what we all need as people is a sense of loving, supportive, compassionate community, like an extended family who don't fight as much. And that's the way we've actually been born. That's the way we've evolved. If we actually have a chance to breathe out and look at ourselves and look at the way our world is and understand what's good and bad about it. But then again, tiny housing, co-housing communities, people be able to move, come and go until they find their tribe, reducing their impact on the planet. It's just such a beautiful checklist of things that the benefits just tick so many boxes that somebody like me who's into social change, we love things like this. They're just so efficient, to just drive around our prototype tiny house, which has got huge solar awnings on it. We're getting rock star status everywhere we go with this tiny house. Thumbs up, people going fantastic. They know exactly what it is. They know what it's all about. They know about the environmental thing. It's off grid. It's self-sustaining. It's also portable as well. It's a house you move. So, yeah, it's interesting. But we're still at the beginning of this industry evolving and maturing. The States is maybe 5 years in front of us. I don't know if they're significantly identifying all these things, but they do kind of fluke it. There are events and convergences for tiny houses. They've got a much bigger population playing with the idea at the moment. But the benefits keep piling up on top of each other, that if we see it all the way through, we can see the future where tiny housing can lead, we can then work backwards to try and help make it happen. So that's why people like me are so, I guess, fired up and can get so passionate about these things that I otherwise don't spend a moment watching on the internet and YouTube videos, because I'm not interested in the architecture. I'm interested in the form, the function of these things and how they can contribute to giving people a more contented and a more meaningful way to live.
I can really feel the passion and the advocacy in you. It's so amazing. And, you know, there are certainly so many benefits as you've talked about. And you've mentioned a few times now intentional communities and eco villages. And, you know, I'm thinking that, you know, when people come together in community, and yes, we were definitely designed as to be social beings, tribal beings, to live and support and be together. I'm wondering what your thoughts are on, you know, maybe some of the principles or the frameworks that might be necessary to have as a guiding compass to create some kind of intentional community, especially one with tiny houses, because obviously everyone has different ways of living and being and perspectives and goals and all of that. So I'd imagine there'd have to be some kind of guiding principles as well.
Absolutely. And it's a really good question to ask. And there are thousands of people who'll have an answer for it as well. I've spent more than 15 years researching intentional communities strictly, looking at the good and bad things, the pros and cons. I've been talking to lots of academics, lots of theorists, lots of people doing it. I also like to not only just look at the brick wall, but I like to not only just analyze the bricks in the brick wall, but to say there's some cracks happening in this brick wall. I get into the concrete. I get into the stuff that goes in between the bricks. I look at the composition of the bricks. I want to look at the composition of the concrete. I want to see what is actually the action which is making this work, but also what is also affecting it or impeding it from being realizing its true potential. But in front of us, when we talk about eco-villages and intentional communities, I'm going to go out on a limb here with all my contemporaries and say, we're looking at a brick wall. From a distance looks great, but up close, it's crumbling and it's a mess. And it doesn't work. I'm going to say that. It just doesn't work. I said it. So when it comes to principles, frameworks, guidelines, and we're constantly asked about this. I get emails through our website for Polkadot saying, I'm thinking of starting a community. Where do I start? Somebody said, you know, we want to do a decentralized autonomous organization or a DAO. Yeah, I'm all across cryptocurrency and blockchain and Bitcoin. We've looked at all the technologies, and technology definitely is going to play a really good role in helping enable this stuff to help us be a band-aid to get us back to where we need to be, which is a more humane society. I don't know if it's ever existed, but we do have humane societies around the world that just aren't living in westernized developed countries. And the answers are all there. I've been to Kenya, I've researched the Pacific Islanders, and there are most people live in a better social environment than we do, hands down, and don't have problems with isolation, anxiety, depression, addiction, gambling, drugs, alcohol, mental illness, gaming, in the absence of any real effective or meaningful community. After failing forward and discovering what's good and bad about all this and getting into a tiny house and living it, yes, there's adjustments. And you get some desperate situations that you've got to just modify, and that's called intelligence and creativity, but determination as well. When it comes to doing something like a tiny house village, or if you want to do an eco village, or you want to do an intentional community, the best way to approach it is to be an unintentional community, is to let people's relationships naturally grow, is to do things gradually, is to have gifting intentions. The idea is that tiny housing can be mobile housing. It can move. This is a fantastic thing. And therefore, you can try different places. You don't have to fix yourself to that place straight up, even if you want to, because we're all filled with this idea. We want security of tenure in a spot that we're definitely going to be so we can plant our gardens and blah, blah, blah. But actually, it creates lots of stress for people. It's expensive as well. It's better to have an attitude, which I've adapted myself to, is that I'm not precious about where I am. I'd rather be with people, around people that would like to have me. And if they don't, then I would be the soonest person straight out of there, because I'd rather continue to find again where my tribe might be. We don't want to be living on top of people, like in a co-housing situation where you're sharing rooms in a house. If someone has a bad episode in their life, everybody's going to feel it. It's nice to be compassionate and there for them, but sometimes we can't handle those things and it becomes toxic. And this is one of the things that undoes intentional communities, that when people have toxic behaviors, you can ruin a community. And we know about toxicity in workplaces. Well, it's worse when you're living there and that's where your home is. So the idea of community, there's so many benefits for it, but we've so lost the ability to be in community, and society has not taught us very much about how we actually work, from being isolated individuals. just ipso facto from the way that we live. It's conditioning that happens when you're individualized. You can live in an apartment block and not know a single person in that apartment block, which would be a crazy idea if you're living in Africa where they practice Ubuntu. It's actually your God-given duty, or your duty as a person, to make sure that someone living 30 houses down the road from you is fine, that they're wealthy enough to get by, and if there's any hurt happening, you must help them. That's part of their code. So when it comes to rules, frameworks, and things like that, there's never going to be one-stop shop for it. The only real way to enter this is to actually open your mind and understand that we're part of the planet. We come from the land. The land, we don't own land. The land owns us. We come from land. We come from the land. Is that we're sharing a finite space, which is still not overcrowded at this stage, but we share a finite space with finite resources, and that we actually have to have that intention. Now, while that could be a crazy idea for a lot of people, particularly if you're wealthy and you're into wealth extraction, why would you embrace hippie ideals like that? Well, there's not hippie ideals, they're actually commonsensical human ideals. Because when all the cards are down and you've got an economy that's on the rocks, we've only got each other and the clothes that we wear, if you have clothes, and then we need to eat. And our whole mind, as being a social animal, has evolved to be a social animal. That actually the corridors naturally that have evolved in our minds to be social animals, because collaboration rewarded those, your great-grandfather and forefathers and grandmothers, all down the line, they all collaborated, and that's what eventually ended up giving them survival to have you living in this century, in this day today. So these behaviors which are implanted naturally in us, if we actually tune into those and listen to those, they're the things that will guide people to live successfully in things like community, which they kind of need. It's how you cultivate community. It should be part of our economy. And it's common sense. Like the stuff that we're doing, we don't have to make it up because we're just reading from the manual that's programmed in all of us to be social, collaborative animals or creatures or human beings, whatever you want to call us. But to short circuit it back to the original question, if you just go, there's a piece of land, there's a place that tiny house can park, the land has got an owner, sometimes they live on the property, that's a really good idea. Don't have to, because maybe there's space for more tiny houses, but have gifting intent, do things to help the other person, common sense. As far as rules and regulations for tenanting are concerned, the government has residential tenancies associations, the RTA, or whatever it's named in your state. We already have the frameworks for what relationships between tenants and landlords are. There are already laws that govern your behavior. You do not have to sign a lease. You're protected by those rules and regulations anyway. And if you care to be bothered to log into your state website, it's usually a state government concern as housing, and find out what the rules and regulations are, sure, you can knock yourself out and learn all that stuff. But it only actually helps you when there's conflict. And as soon as there's conflict, I would say to you, if you've got a tiny house on wheels, whether you're right or wrong, get the hell out of there. You can move. And that's the biggest ticket to success, is just get out of there and find another place where you might click with people better. And maybe you did some things that are a little bit stupid. You can learn from that, because that's what happens when you're driving the house out that driveway and onto the road. It's like, I think I kind of stuffed up there. We have to learn ourselves to live in community, and none of us are perfect. And so moving also helps you reinvent yourself, because a change is as good as a holiday. You've got laws of the land to cover you irrespective of what agreement you have. Where we live, we actually don't have a written down formal agreement. We are just keeping it verbal. It's all intention. We fall over ourselves to help each other. Our hosts fall over backwards to help us. They have done such amazing things. We have also been really good tenants because we have helped them achieve some things. We've helped them by being here. We've been company for their children. Our children are being their company as well. We've formed a little bit of informal community. We understand sometimes where there are problems, but we haven't had problems between each other that much at all. But it's laws of the land, gifting intention, look after the other person, listen to their needs, be considerate, don't overwhelm them, listen to them, empathize more, be passionate. If they need a hand and you can see it from a distance, find a good time to drop in and say, hey, would you like to have a chat? And God, those things can go so far. And I've seen it naturally happen under my nose. Just dropping in ideas like go take these, Mars bar slices down to the other house and just offer them. And I know that they won't come back for an hour or two, because they're all going to have an informal chat. They're all going to feel happy, and they're going to go to bed feeling happy because they had connection. And that is the most important thing underlying everything, more important than money, wealth, how many things you own. That connection, without it, you're struggling. And that's like almost everybody. I don't know too many people who can go without that connection. So that's the priority. And that's, again, why the tiny house is so good to enable that.
I'd imagine there'd also be a certain amount of, especially if you're maybe starting a new community or coming into an existing community, of knowing like what the communal expectations are, and maybe also having certain boundaries as well, like healthy boundaries around things and having space as well. And as you say, like consideration for other people, and tapping back into that innate, this thing that we all have within us that allows us to connect with each other. And, you know, the reality is as well, because I've heard from just different people, and just, I guess, as an experience being human, is we're not going to vibe with everyone. And, you know, we're not, even if people can be in a like-minded community of sorts, sometimes different personalities might not vibe, different dynamics or whatever it might be. So, Jimmy, you know, as we start to wrap up the conversation today, so you mentioned a bit about your tiny app, the Polkadot app, and then the prototype that you've got. And then you've also got, I think that's the Living Free Tiny House. And then you've also doing the Tiny Living Tour. Do you want to just share, you know, a little bit more about how people can, you know, check that out a little bit more, and anything else that you maybe haven't said about them?
Sure. All the activities that we have, which are all experimental, failing forward, trying our best. Polkadot.org.au, we're a not-for-profit, we're a social enterprise. The intention behind it all is to see what we can do to help people possibly lead a better life, if we can do some very simple things to inspire or change that, but very passively, not in a controlling regard. We have an app which is, it's actually out now, but it's in beta. So we're not sort of publicly sharing it at the moment because we need to do a lot of testing and it needs to have a lot of housework done to it. But all the principles of living that I've been talking about, the ultimate goal one day is to implant those, I guess, into the app. So the app becomes a tool to helping match, organize, but also helping keep those relationships good between people. We've taken a page from the book of woofing, which is a bit of a barter system, but also merging that with the currency of staying, because property does carry a value. And to rent a spot to park a caravan or a tiny house doesn't carry as much high value as it does just to rent a house these days. So I think at the moment, there's that bandwidth that to park something on someone's property, even just a small suburban yard, can't really cost a lot of money. It couldn't really be a big ask, so it's going to be affordable living. And that if we assert that there's a minimum wage in Australia, $20, $25 an hour, that, you know, if you're paying for a spot that, say, is $150 a week with power and water supplied, which is more efficient, you could work that off in a day easily and then spend the rest of the 6 days getting back to your own life, or you could scatter it across many days. So we're sort of introducing like a tasks system of barter. So you can be a landlord or a host and you can offer your place and say, well, these are the tasks that we need help with. And in the free market, the tenant can choose the ones that they think they're most suited to doing. So they're not forced to do things that they don't want to do. That freedom still exists. If the tenant doesn't want to do things that are needed in the property, and the landlord needs definitely the grass mown or something, then find a tenant that is happy to grow them up for, you know, cut the grass, because that's your right. And then that their right is that they have a myriad of other properties they can choose from in the future, definitely, that they can find the one that they are most compatible with. So they can barter that. So that creates extremely affordable accommodation. Some people on properties don't need the money. They just want good company. Maybe they just would like to have, you know, an older couple would like to have a single parent or even a family around who have children, and just add colour and vitality to the property they're living on. The number of times I've seen elderly property owners, when I've invited families onto a property and just watched their faces glow and they're smiling, and I just like, just having them here has made your life so much better. Imagine if that could be every day. So that's the app. The tiny house prototype, again, it's a tiny house designed for all these aspects in mind, including social, environmental, mobility, etc. It's just based on industrial standards. It fits into, again, the whole lifestyle that we're envisaging in the future that could commonsensely become a new normal very easily because the needs are there. But half-size shipping container-sized houses that are easily mobile can be carted around just using a vehicle like a four-wheel drive or a good SUV. The tiny house itself, half-size shipping container, 3 by 2.5 meters, one level, single level, no lofts, no extra weight you don't need. The one we've got at the moment has solar awnings, which serve a really good purpose and help get it off grid. So to help them be self-contained and off grid as well. So a lot of builders just build a house, put in the basics, but we've gone further to make sure it's got satellite internet, solar water generation as well, even growing some of your own herbs inside, how we recycle waste. There's a whole trajectory of innovation for years mapped out in front of them to the point where they self-drive. You can travel in them between Melbourne and Sydney overnight. You talk to it, to your Google Assistant, whatever, and map a track, and it will drive you up and plug into the recharging stations. The walls will become carbon fiber, which makes them incredibly light, incredibly strong. The walls also become the batteries because carbon is a form of storage of energy. So, and it's a more natural and a more sustainable form of solar battery or electrical battery as well. And the cars themselves, with so much battery power in the Teslas and the electric cars, are also batteries themselves that can be used for your house. So the whole living thing, it kind of eventually plugs into each other, and we can create something really amazing as a new living vessel, which you can drive into the middle of the country and not need to connect it to water or power because it's already got it. It's got satellite internet. You're as connected as you would be in the middle of the desert as you would be living in a city. But you can turn the connection off and you can just be in nature if you need to as well. So there's a lot of technology and innovation that we've envisaged for tiny housing. We're currently keen to talk with manufacturers who themselves are in it for the long term, the long game, and would like an amazing business in front of them. As if Apple was generating tiny houses, we want to be doing that because there is so much potential, which again, we're only skimming the top of the iceberg at the moment in terms of that. And in terms of how we get this out to people, we're talking to people who organize events, either eco events or tiny house festivals. We wish to take it to school ovals as well, but we're actually forming slowly our own tiny house tour, or a tiny house touring sustainable community, or I call it in some words a circus of sustainability, but a group of like-minded people who themselves are a community of gifting intent and value and vision to helping, the mainstream, where we turn up to events with our sustainable community and we serve solar popcorn, we can serve solar chips, we can serve or provide entertainment like electric bike rides, we can power children's amusements with solar panels as well. So it's a really good way of showing how people can be friendly to the environment, but you get to keep your fun, because a lot of people think that being environmental means you get to lose all that, or you have to lose all that. Well, it may be that we change that, but our lives are just as happy if we do something slightly differently, and maybe they're better because we're not impacting in the environment. So to be a touring demonstration of sustainable community living. And then on top of that, we're doing advocacy. We have run events. We run summits with town planners, with people who are high up or into the tiny housing industry, or the co-living, co-housing, collaborative housing, eco-hamlets kind of world of intentional communities. We're also engaging currently with our local councillors, community development on the Sunshine Coast to try and amend the rules to be friendlier to tiny housing so people don't feel the fear of being shut down or closed out. And most of it actually really just comes down to how you handle neighbours. So there's a bit of common sense again that falls into this picture, that you don't need to necessarily become all versed up on all the complexity of rules and stuff. You just got to deal with your waste properly and get along with your neighbours. And that's just the simple answer. You can park a tiny house anywhere. As long as you really nail those two aspects, there's not really much else you have to do. But for a lot of people, they don't really understand how it works, and so they need to be kind of told or guided or handheld for the process, which is understandable because at school you weren't taught any of this stuff, so we get it. And that's what Polkadot is here to do, to try and bridge that transition between that way of thinking and perhaps something which may be more livable.
Yeah, and so many great offerings that you guys are involved in. And what's that website one more time?
So our website is Polkadot, which is spelled P for Peter, O-L-K, A, D for Donald, O, and T for Thomas, .org.au.
All right. I will put that in the show notes for sure, so everyone can go and check that out and get in contact with you. And then you've got a Facebook page as well?
Yeah, we have a Facebook
group. Yep.
Yeah, if you just go to Facebook and type, we say tiny houses, tiny villages, we'll probably pop up. You can also just go for our URL, which is facebook.com/groups/Polkadot community is one word. And it's a popular, very, very good, popular discussion group of several thousand people in it, where you get to look at pictures of tiny houses or talk about the issues that we talk about today, sometimes touch upon it in the popular press and stuff. It's good.
Perfect. I'll also link to that in the show notes. And just want to say, Jimmy, thank you so much for your time today and for the passion and the inspiration and the advocacy around tiny houses. I feel like, this is such an important conversation to continue to have, this secure, affordable housing and this community coming back to each other and all of this stuff for the future. So thank you so much again for your time.
Thank you very much. You're very welcome. And thank you again for your interest and your energy in wishing to find out, research, and tell these stories to help enlighten and inspire a lot more people. I mean, this is fantastic. More of this.
Yeah, more of this.
Well done.
Thank you. Stay tuned for more of this. And if you're listening to us at home, thank you so much for taking the time to hang out with us today. If you want more Tiny House conversations, stay tuned every Thursday, as that's when newer episodes are live. And until next time, I'll see you soon. Thanks again for listening. And if you enjoyed the conversation today, you found it valuable and you want to support the podcast, the best way you can do that is to share the love. That way I can keep bringing you more tiny house conversations to help you on your own tiny journey. So here are 3 ways that you can support the podcast. Number 1, if you have a friend or family member that you feel would benefit from hearing these conversations, feel free to share it with them, email them, text them, send them a telegram, do whatever you need to do to share it with them. Number 2, if you hit the subscribe button, you'll know exactly when the next episode is live. And number 3, if you head on over to Apple Podcasts or wherever you're listening to podcasts and leave a 5-star rating and review. Thank you so much in advance. I appreciate you, and I'll see you in the next episode.